Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Today, I'd like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to share our suggestions for the next federal budget on behalf of the 60,000 university professors, library researchers, staff working in over 120 universities and colleges throughout the country. Our association advocates for improving the quality of post-secondary education, increasing access, and defending academic freedom.
Against science and scientists, Canada needs a new vision to get science right and improve accessibility and quality of post-secondary education. CAUT welcomes the new government commitments to unmuzzle government scientists, to make government science fully available to the public, and to ensure that scientific analysis are considered in decision-making. CAUT applauds the restoring of the long-form census. We were also pleased to see that the new science minister's mandate includes the examinations of option to strengthen the recognition and support for fundamental research. For years, CAUT has been raising concerns about the former government's direction in science policy that favored narrowed commercial interest at the expense of basic research and the broader public interest. It is now clear that this strategy has not delivered the promised investments and jobs, and Canada is falling behind other developed countries in science and innovation. More needs to be done to rebuild Canada's research capacity, starting with more investment in basic research. And infusions of $3 billion of new research and development money would be needed in this country right now today to bring us back to what was spent in 2006 level. Now is the time for the federal government to invest in Canada's knowledge infrastructure and boost Canada's scientific capacity. More precisely, CAUT recommends that in this year's budget, the federal government invests an additional $250 million, then $350 million the following year, and $500 million in 3 years, in base funding for basic research to the 3 research granting councils. It should do so while ensuring research funding provided through Canada's research granting councils and decisions about priorities, projects, programs, and scholarships are made using peer review process by the scientific committee on the basis of merit. We also recommend the federal government invest and reinvest significantly in its own research. The former federal government cut about $1 billion and 4,000 jobs from government science programs. This has reduced the ability of the government scientists to provide independent and reliable data at the service of the public interest. Finally, we believe that the Parliament of Canada would strongly benefit from a parliamentary science officer, PSO. The PSO should be an independent officer of the Library of Parliament who would report to the Senate and the House of Commons. His or her role would be to provide advice and analysis to Parliament about the adequacy and effectiveness of the nation's science policy priorities and funding. L'investissement dans nos infrastructures du savoir.
Investing in our knowledge infrastructure cannot happen in a vacuum. It has to be done along with improving access and participation in post-secondary education. In 1990, public grants made up to about 80% of the operating costs of universities, compared to 50% in 2014. And this is mainly due to a decrease in transfers of the federal government to the provincial governments as of 1990. The CAUT calls upon the federal government to collaborate with the provinces in order to establish and implement a post-secondary strategy in order to eliminate all barriers to post-secondary education, including financial barriers. The CAUT recommends that instead of the transfers for social programs, there be independent funding for post-secondary education, that there be a new transfer for post-secondary education that be part of a national strategy. And that should be framed by a legislation on post-secondary education based on the health legislation and Health Act. It should not depend on each government, but rather there should be national guidelines that would set stable, long-term financial funding. And in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, increasing tuition costs adds additional burdens for students, especially Indigenous students in Canada. Funds to bands could help students have access. However, the tuition costs have gone up significantly. There are still people on wait lists to obtain funding that could allow them to pursue post-secondary studies. It is time for the federal government to respect its promises to the Indigenous peoples in Canada and to recognize education as being a right under these treaties. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shutang.